Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, World Alternative Media here in Rome, and it has often been said that the world is littered with the ruins of empires who thought they were eternal. The Roman Empire, among a few others, tend to take the historical cake, if you will, when it comes to rising and falling. An empire that thought they would forever rule the world, an empire that conquered all in its path, including former ancient empires like Egypt, who themselves thought that they would forever rule. As we know, the Roman Empire burned as Nero played his fiddle. The arrogance and power brought to the empire submission and weakness. Well, we are seeing such a rise and fall from grace once again, but perhaps on a far more dangerous scale. The fall of the U.S. empire on our doorsteps. There are so many similarities between the fall of Rome and what we currently see in the United States, among other global nation states and entities like the European Union, China, and other so-called superpowers. Far too often, people build the Tower of Babel thinking they could build it to the sky and never stop building, only to be struck down and collapse under their own weight. From politics to money, from entertainment to debauchery, from good foundations and voluntarism to mass slavery under the collectivist mantra of the greater good of the greater number, and the prolonged sustenance of the realm. There is a lot to talk about in this report. First of all, let's start with politics. We've all heard the stories of the American Revolution and the notion of small governance under the guise of self-governance. The United States came to be by the hands of a few voluntary militia forces, completely private, who were vastly outnumbered and hailed victory in defeating another massive empire, the British World Order. The people did not wish to be ruled by kings or queens. They did not wish to be extorted for the realm across the seas. They wanted localized governance structures based on individual demand in specific areas. They wanted self-determination. While the win against the British was temporary, as in it only lasted a couple of decades if one considers the introduction of a British-tied central banking system in the 1790s, helped to be by the lone Yankee, Alexander Hamilton, the win was definitive nonetheless for the time being, and the win was truly legendary. A new republic was formed, and the British were largely defeated until the War of 1812. The localized governance constantly grew, however, as is the reality of government, cancer on humanity. You can cut 95% of that cancer, but 5% still remains, and it will always grow. There will always be evil men and women who vie for power, and no power is enough for the psychopathic control freaks who wish to control the ideas, movements, culture, and thoughts of the dependent populace. The formation of ancient Rome and the growth of power was quite similar when compared with the United States. Though spread out over a longer period of time, the Roman Empire started off with the abolition of royalty, and its roots pertained to far more localized government and people fighting voluntarily simply to defend their home, their property, and their families and neighbors in sort of a voluntary militia group. The governance structure began to grow surely but slowly. Like that cancer I spoke of, it continuously grew with arrogance and a strong belief in an eternal realm. Government replaced religion to a great degree under the guise of a religious order. The military began to grow and break away from its founding roots of defense and further into offense as proxy wars were waged and military became mercenaries. Government began to shift to the top echelon and representation dwindled. No more were the decisions made on local issues by local governance, but instead by the massive orders that knew not the situation of the specific communities trying to determine the right decisions for these issues. As Dr. Ken Calvert asks, how does a republic founded on local rule, on popular rule, on knowing one another in the street now become an empire? This is the greatest challenge for Rome. It is being weakened and indeed is going to be destroyed by its own success. As the United States grew from private militias defending their homes and communities into an entity that wielded so much power that it committed acts of egregious horror unto populaces worldwide with proxy wars and colonization, as it killed millions in the name of so-called freedom, after usually arming and funding those same enemies over and over again, creating somewhat of a Hegelian dialectic of problem, reaction, solution, repeat. As the US empire grew far away from the ideas of local governance into a massive global complex, deciding the fate of individuals in communities that the government did not know, as representation dwindled, as government buckled under the weight of the Tower of Babel, it is being weakened, and indeed is going to be destroyed by its own success. People often say that money is the root of all evil, but I believe that it's more so the quest for absolute power, which one can wield with enough money. But we often see entities give up money for power. In the case of Facebook, we see CEO Mark Zuckerberg admit to losing money in order to be able to further control the narrative, following a change to algorithm a couple of years ago when it was decided that for the sake of psychology, as he put it, people could no longer see news pages and businesses in their feed unless they went out of their way to see it, and instead they would just see posts from family members in their newsfeed. He said, "We will lose money on this, but it's better for people's mental health." Well, that's one way to virtue signal, tell people what they want to see for them, and completely control narratives being spread on the dwindling social media platform. Anyways, in the year 443 BC, Rome established the office of the censor, which dictated public morale and maintaining the census. They essentially invented the modern meaning of the word censorship. Interestingly, as people were further and further restricted from speaking and further restricted from disobeying the powers they did not support, people got more and more fed up. The government has this thing about pushing people to rebel in their quest to stop rebellion, like parents telling their children not to do something. It's reverse psychology. Gradually, censorship becomes more and more strict. Words mean new things. New things offend the crown or the emperor or the republic. People are convinced that they are victims, not of the state, but by free-thinking people who oppose official ideas, which people are told to be emotionally invested in, even if they've simply been brainwashed to accept such emotion as an identity rather than an actual opinion. In the United States today, among countless nations throughout the world, people are more and more told to feel as though they are victims because of the molding of the mind by the media and establishment mouthpiece meant to keep people divided and fighting each other, distracted from the true enemies of mankind, using their divide to benefit from the chaos and dependency of the populace. As people are forced into fear, the greatest mechanism of the state. Order out of chaos, if you will. Conspiracy theorists deem domestic terror threats, allowing the state to watch them at all times. Commit warrantless arrests, tap their phones, kidnap, and even kill them under the guise of stopping the hate criminals. They tug at people's emotions and get people to repeat after them. One says something about, for example, a school shooting. They're spreading a theory. It might be a terrible theory, but they call it lateral violence, and therefore people should be emotionally invested in not allowing people to say such horrible things about children who've been killed. Then it escalates as there is no line to truly be drawn. It's all subjective, and the line gets pushed back by the month. Meanwhile, no one comprehends the notion that the state has killed more children than any other entity. The hypocrisy reigns. The state is also the biggest polluter, biggest thief of funds, but still manages to maintain a moral high ground somehow among the average normie in order to ensure the prolonging of their control and the subservience of the masses. We can thank the censors for such an Orwellian reality. The Roman governance structure fooled the masses into believing that they had rid the empire of the tyrants and that they had the right to vote and determine leadership. They gave people a few choices, all choices controlled by the same elite entities. The Roman people had believed that they overthrew kings to establish a senate. Little did they know that they just switched the poison out for a new poison, where people laid more complacent and believed they had a choice, while truly just propping up an entity of so-called democracy, serving the same elites, allowing the state to simply be powered by stupid people in big numbers voting for criminals to extort their neighbors. All the while, lobbying became more and more of an issue as private criminal entities lobbied public criminal governments to have an upper hand and create monopolies. I would note that corruption was a regular occurrence, but that goes with the territory of politics in general, so it's far too vague to mention in the context of the similarities between the empires. The Romans, of course, saw their nation as exceptional, that no nation compared. It gave them a godlike complex where they believed their name alone would give them eternal life. Like God came down and granted Rome the world. They also led to a lot of carelessness among the Romans, as it does today when it comes to the United States. This idea that they cannot lose, so the risks become more and more riskier, and the tyranny becomes more and more out in the open, assuming that people will always bend the knee to it. Laws continued to pile sky high through the age of the Roman Empire. As laws got more and more ridiculous, violence got more and more prevalent, bringing fear to the masses, which in turn led to the people bowing down further to the state. While two crime rackets destroyed the lives and comfort of the many, the state and the desperate street gangs, as it appeared, more and more people were passionately beginning to stand up against the Roman Empire. In came the bread and circuses, the spectacles to keep people at bay, the gladiator fights, the sports games, the teams, the music, the plays, the public events. While entertainment in an age where people's lives were far more simple, it kept people distracted and in many cases stupid. It kept people sitting admiring greater men while keeping their minds off of the vast poverty taking hold of the empire, as that empire spent absurd amounts of money on making themselves look larger than life, with some of the most incredible architectural feats up to that point, outside of far earlier Egyptian structures as well as other mysterious structures from around the world, placed sporadically, like I mentioned, by empires who thought they were eternal. Noting the vast poverty, it's important to link such a thing to the vast money printing and banking powers taking hold of the empire. You can easily link the age of an empire to the level of central planning and the monetary system itself, alongside, of course, an all-powerful slave racket some would call government generosity. Romans used gold for the majority of their early years. There was competition of currency, but the vast public's demand weighed on gold. Hannibal of Carthage, waging war in what is called the Second Punic War, led to vast deficit spending in order to keep up with the debts being created at the point of a spear. The government begun demonetizing cash, melting down the coinage, and minting more coins out of copper, leading to vast inflation. Inflation created a dictatorship and destroyed the republic. This is what led to the creation of the Roman Empire. It was interesting that Rome was formed by overthrowing royalty and was eventually replaced by an empire in itself. As we saw in the Weimar Republic, the actual metals in the coinage became more and more washed down to bare minimum value, with shiny surfaces to make it appear as though they were worth something. We saw this in the Roman Empire. We see this today in the United States. This is a desperate move, but like moths to a light, the state and banking system, which commits fraud via fractional reserve lending and creating vast amounts of currency charged to the taxpayer, believes people will fall for the shiny coins over the coins that have market value. Rome continued to print vast amounts of currency, thinking they would solve the problems they had originally created by currency creation. It was a never-ending cycle, as we see today in the United States on a far more digital scale, with many lessons learned from the past, but barely noticeable differences between the mistakes of the past and the mistakes of the present. The Romans took part in a thing called coin clipping. A Roman would enter a government building and their coin would be clipped into slivers. They would melt the slivers down and make new coinage. Today, we see portions of food or drinks reduced, or the value of said food continuously rise. The modern day version of coin clipping, as obviously it would be far more noticeable to the average person to see their coins clipped into smaller coins. It's pretty smart that companies have simply learned to reduce the quantity of food in a package or in a bottle in order to make up for the loss in buying power. Now, the Romans would also simply change the noted value on the coins regularly to make up for the heavily inflated price of living. Like we see in Venezuela or previously in Zimbabwe, among many other countries throughout the world, the state would either add zeros or remove zeros. I just saw this while traveling in Mauritania. The currency lost so much of its buying power that the 10 aguilla bill became 100 aguilla bills, and the 100 aguilla bills became 1,000 aguilla bills. This is a frustrating situation for people living there, as the old notes are still in circulation and there are many scams and conversion issues among people on the ground. This was a 1-to-10 ratio conversion, and it's incredibly stressful to have to deal with. Anyways, Rome's constant war and colonization led to vast currency debasement. In the United States, following the creation of the Federal Reserve, we saw World War I break out based on the sinking of the Lusitania. The printing presses went to work. The state and tied-in private central bank would create far more IOU notes than there would be gold, seemingly unlimited amounts. This fake IOU note paper would flood into the stock market, and the state would use it to manipulate the economy and the markets, creating fake temporary prosperity but long-term devastation. This led to the 1921 Depression and the 1929 Great Depression, which was then followed by World War II, which was then followed by the Korean War. Every time the dollar and the markets would begin to fail, in came a new war. Vietnam, the Cold War, Bosnia, the Gulf War, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars following the 2001 dot-com bubble. The war in Libya, Yemen, and proxy wars throughout the world under Obama following the recession. Sound familiar? Today, the push to go to war with Iran and Syria continue as we anticipate the greatest economic collapse in history. A collapse that is inevitable, as all fiat currencies eventually revert to zero. Every single one throughout history fails. And many would say we're already in what some would call a ghost crash following the 2008 recession, as it appears the recession was just papered over with debt and fake currency. Every monetary crisis appears to be tied to a war, and now one would say it's sounding more and more conspiratorial. Well, consider the fact that looking back in history, the US propped up Hitler against the communists. The US formed an alliance with the USSR against Hitler. The US armed and funded the Mujahideen, or Al-Qaeda, against the USSR. FDR helped prop up Vietnam's Ho Chi Minh. Then the US attacked their own ship, bringing the United States into war with Vietnam. The US armed and funded Iraq's Ba'athist Party. The US armed and funded the Taliban. They armed and funded ISIS. The rabbit hole continues as the empire creates problems to give themselves an excuse to keep people in fear, in servitude, and prop up the monetary system in order to carry it on as long as possible, all the while giving the state more power both at home and internationally. But it all ends in the same calamity. Rome found themselves spinning in a circle. Wars, debasement, inflation, people getting fed up, creating new ways to tax the cattle, more wars, more debasement, more inflation. The church stacked gold while the public dealt in rusted copper for the most part, with less and less copper and silver in each coin delivered to the public. The Roman Empire continued to spend vast amounts of money on great temples to themselves, on large parties for support and subservience, on the greatest weapons, on entire cities, on palaces, on gold, on marble, on whatever they could get their hands on, thinking that the public will foot the bill, whether they like it or not, and that the public are too stupid to lose faith in the currency and their arrogant masters. Taxes rose dramatically on businesses, causing countless businesses to shut down, and thousands of people to suddenly become unemployed and impoverished. The government begun stealing people's private possessions in order to fill their empty vaults and pay back unimaginable debts. Inflation skyrocketed 43,000% in just 50 years. Emperor Diocletian begun giving homeless people jobs in government, raising wages, putting the impoverished into the military to fight for money while debasing currency to keep up with the war spending. Social programs ran amok. For the first time in history, so much currency was printed that hyperinflation took over, causing panic in the streets and causing the currency to become essentially worthless. Thinking that central planning would solve the problems of central planning, Emperor Diocletian released his Edict of Prices, a thick book telling people what wages they can and cannot pay and what prices should be. If you didn't follow along with this edict, you would be executed, which is exactly what the impoverished wanted to hear at the time. Obviously, I'm being sarcastic. People started closing their stores out of fear of execution, and the market continued to plummet. Profits could not be made with such vast social programs, and people became more and more impoverished. When people started quitting their jobs in order to find work that wasn't listed in the Edict of Prices, Diocletian enforced another law saying every son had to go into his father's business or be executed. Eventually, things got so bad that people rose up and disobeyed. There was panic on the streets. Crime skyrocketed while police forces doubled and tripled. The more police, the more crimes, the more violence. Groups formed in the shadows to overthrow the order. Everyone knew something was wrong, but they weren't sure how long it would hold out. Those in power continued to spout that all was well and that the Roman Empire would soon enter into a new golden age. Then suddenly, Rome fell, and so did the empire. It burned to the ground. Rome was no more. As the US prints inflation rises and people get more and more fed up, their money buys less. They make less at their job, and the fraud of social contract usury, where you must be extorted or taxed to pay off the interest on the debt, continues to make them more and more poor. As people get more and more poor, they get more and more desperate. The state attempts to find new ways to create tax cattle. But it's a dying system, and they know it has to come to an end. The currency is only worth as much as people have faith in it. Countries throughout the world start rejecting it. Interest rates drop, and it looks like they will drop below zero. Banks will pay you to get a mortgage. It's insane. The similarities with the Roman Empire and the United States are incredible. Even the US Treasury was modeled after the Forum in Rome, where the currency was printed. There's obviously symbolism tied to ancient Rome as well as the Egyptians before them, but that's a whole other video. Nixon took the US off the already fake gold standard. He believed he'd rid the country of inflation. Inflation continued up at an even more enormous rate. So he put in price controls as well as further restricted wages, much like Diocletian. The market shuddered. Every time the Fed and state try to fix a problem they created, they create a new problem. The empire has been in a steady tailspin. Innovation has been greatly restricted. Sure, we've seen many technological marvels since the days of Nixon, but imagine what we could be seeing without the restrictions. Government constantly grows, and it always comes under the guise of free things and fairness. It's a trap. It's a scam. An unbelievable myth that many believe because they simply don't understand money, markets, or the utter servitude and wasted opportunity humanity faces when restricted by government. Life is a miracle, yet we treat it like a task. The government comes in, says there are monopolies on the rise, so they tax businesses and regulate businesses more. More centralization. The big businesses can survive the restrictions. They lay off people and automate. Small businesses fail and cannot keep up. Innovation, productivity, choices, competition, selling the best product at the best price for mutually beneficial reasons. All of the things that make the markets work, they all get destroyed. Monopolies grow bigger at the hand of the state. No one blinks an eye. People think that what they need is more government to save them. It creates the same problem perpetually for eternity, until it doesn't. Until people find new ways to evade the state. Until Rome burns. Today, Rome is just a relic, a beautiful relic, but nonetheless, it's no more than a museum piece, much like the medieval Italian Renaissance. It's a tourist attraction. Unfortunately, people do not remember why it's a museum piece. People take selfies, people say, wow, that's cool, that's so old, Caligula, Caesar, gladiators. But they know not what built Rome and ultimately what brought Rome to heel. They don't understand why the statue of David and the statues of Dante in Florence from the Renaissance stare warningly towards Rome as to say, be careful, your powers will be your downfall. This will happen again as these psychopaths at the top of the food chain build their temples to the stars and continue to crack down on people's free will further and further with each passing day, throwing them cake from time to time in order to keep them appeased as the bread and circuses play out and the media divide spectacles hold people's attention. It will end, and it will end soon. The empire will burn. The temples will become relics. The songs will become forgotten. The stories will be misunderstood. The presidents will become statues. The alphabet soup agencies will no longer be. Grass will grow long. Roofs will cave in. The archive of digital information will largely perish. One of these two things will happen. History will, as Mark Twain says, rhyme, and we will see a new empire form under the guise of a free republic, constantly growing like a cancer. Or we will free ourselves and decide our own fate. Technologies will replace the state. We will decentralize. We will be self-sufficient and independent rather than irresponsible and subservient. Children will learn to build, not follow. Humanity will witness a new renaissance of individual liberty, the likes of which we've never known before, with a free competing currency and self-governance or voluntary contractual governance structures strictly enforced by said contract, unchangeable. Free collectives, not collectivism. Statism has always failed. Empires always fall, and government cannot give us freedom. They can only take it away. It's time we realize our potential and live free. Good ideas do not require force, and free will must be taken. It cannot be given. Every election you hear people talk of change. Perhaps the change they are looking for is within, not outside of their being. Perhaps they don't want a different emperor in new clothes. Perhaps they truly, deep down, wish to see the entire system abolished. Perhaps that's the change they wish to see, but instead it's far more comfortable to support a different version of the same thing, hoping these smiling faces in suits will change things for them. It has never worked going back to ancient Greece, and it certainly didn't work in Rome. And it doesn't work today. The sooner we realize this, the more prosperous our futures. But first, Rome must fall. and it will fall. Like what you see here, OM, don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated as we are so heavily demonetized and shadow banned to a crazy extent. We have lost about 80% of our reach since the beginning of this year as they rip away subscribers, etc. It has gotten out of control and it's becoming more and more difficult to stay alive here on World Alternative Media, bringing you guys free content every day. You can also check our Bitcoin address in the description as well as on the screen for you to scan if you please. And also check us out on all these other alternatives like Subscribestar, where we are doing subscriber only content for people at the $4.99 US a month tier and up. We really appreciate it. You could tip us on there and pledge anything, but from $4.99 and up, we are giving people subscriber only content that you won't find here on YouTube. And speaking of YouTube, there are so many alternatives for YouTube these days, including BitChute, which we are on at World Alternative Media, as well as, of course, the new flote.app, flote.app, where they are truly replacing all of these social medias, including Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Tumblr, Reddit, and of course, Twitch and Patreon, all in one place, and it is truly incredible what they are doing. We are moving over there in mass, as well as BitChute, BitTube, Steemit at Josh Sigurdson, all those other places, as well as PocketNet. We are on as well at World Alternative Media. There's so many options today, and we're trying to get into as many of them as possible because we need to back ourselves up. We are winning this information war, but we are getting to a point where they are cracking down more desperately than ever, and we got to do whatever we can to stay alive as it's getting more and more difficult all the time. We also have events coming up, including Anarchadelphia 2019, which will be in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in September. Check out thestateofanarchy.com and anarchadelphia.com. Linked below, use promo code WAM, W-A-M, and save 10% on your tickets to this amazing conference as Anarchy is going viral. Also, make sure to check out the Winnipeg Crypto Conference in October. Also, use promo code WAM, another great event with amazing speakers, and of course, Anarchapulco, the one and only, in February 2020, which you can also use promo code WAM for WAM and save 10%. There's so many things that you can do to help independent media, including just pressing like, sharing, clicking the notification button, doing whatever you can to help keep this free information alive that's alternative to the mainstream. Anyway, until next time, thanks for watching, everyone. This is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.
Thank you.